How could a nation filled with small houses, crowded streets, and limited technology feel so deeply connected? In the 1950s, America was not free from problems. The scars of the Great Depression were still visible. World War II had recently ended, and the Cold War was beginning to cast a long shadow of fear. Yet despite uncertainty, economic inequality, and global tension, one emotional experience was surprisingly rare among ordinary Americans: deep loneliness. To modern audiences, living in an age of constant digital connection but widespread isolation, this feels almost impossible to imagine. How did people in the 1950s, with fewer conveniences, fewer choices, and fewer freedoms by today's standards, manage to feel less alone? The answer lies not in nostalgia or romanticized memory, but in the structure of everyday life itself. To understand why Americans in the 1950s rarely felt alone, we must first understand how closely woven their lives were. Loneliness is not simply the absence of people, it is the absence of belonging. In the 1950s, belonging was built into nearly every aspect of daily existence. Neighborhoods were not just places where people lived, they were social ecosystems. Most Americans lived in stable communities where families stayed for decades, not years. Neighbors knew each other's names, routines, struggles, and stories. Children played in the same streets every day, often without supervision, forming bonds that felt more like extended family than friendship. Adults greeted each other on porches, sidewalks, and front lawns. It was common to know not just your immediate neighbors, but everyone on your block. Privacy existed, but isolation did not. Homes themselves were designed to encourage interaction. Front porches were not decorative, they were social spaces. Evenings were spent sitting outside, watching children play, exchanging news, and sharing small talk. These casual, repeated interactions built familiarity and trust. No one needed an invitation to feel included. Presence alone was enough. Family life also played a central role. In the 1950s, the family unit was the core emotional structure of society. Extended families often lived close to one another, if not under the same roof. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins were part of everyday life. Meals were shared events, not rushed obligations. Dinner was often eaten together, at the same time, every night. Conversation was unavoidable and expected. Children grew up surrounded by people. They were rarely alone, rarely entertained by screens, and rarely separated from adult life. They listened to conversations, absorbed values, and learned how to exist within a group. This constant exposure to human presence shaped their emotional development. Loneliness did not have much room to grow. Work culture further reinforced connection. Many Americans worked close to home, often with people they knew personally. Co-workers were not just professional contacts, they were neighbors, friends, church members, and relatives. Workplaces felt communal. People talked, shared meals, and supported one another through hardships. Employment was not just a source of income, it was a source of identity and belonging. Community institutions were everywhere. Churches, schools, unions, clubs, and local organizations formed the backbone of social life. In the 1950s, church attendance was at historic highs, not only for religious reasons, but because churches were social hubs. They hosted gatherings, celebrations, charity drives, and weekly rituals that brought people together regularly. Even those who were not deeply religious still participated because that was where community happened.
Civic organizations flourished. Bowling leagues, veterans groups, parent-teacher associations, and volunteer clubs filled calendars. Participation was expected, not optional. Belonging was not something you searched for, it was something you inherited by simply living in a place. Technology, or rather the lack of it, also played a major role. In the 1950s, there were no smartphones, no social media, no constant digital entertainment. Television existed, but programming was limited, and families often watched together. Radios brought news and stories into homes, but they did not isolate individuals. Silence was common, but it was shared silence. Without endless digital stimulation, people turned to each other. Boredom was solved through conversation, not scrolling. Emotional processing happened out loud. People talked through their worries, frustrations, and fears with those around them. Loneliness thrives in silence and invisibility, conditions that were rare in a world where everyone's life was visible to their community. Expectations also mattered. Americans in the 1950s did not expect to be constantly fulfilled or emotionally satisfied. Life was not supposed to be endlessly exciting. Emotional ups and downs were accepted as normal. Because expectations were lower, disappointment felt less personal. People did not assume something was wrong with them if they felt sad or restless. These emotions passed through community rather than being examined in isolation. This was not always healthy, but it was socially effective. Looking back, the 1950s should not be idealized as a perfect era. Many people were excluded, silenced, or marginalized. But within its social framework, one truth stands out clearly. People were rarely alone because society was built to keep them together. Today, we live in larger houses with smaller social circles. We communicate constantly, yet often feel unseen. The 1950s remind us that loneliness is not cured by connection alone, but by belonging, routine, shared purpose, and physical presence. Americans in the 1950s did not feel less lonely because life was easier. They felt less lonely because life was shared. And that may be the most surprising lesson of all.